Welcome back. So, are there any questions from the beginning until just before the break? Any comments, anything you'd like to share before we continue? Okay, then we shall continue with our awareness in our heart. And you may have noticed that during the break that it can easily slip. Our awareness easily goes somewhere else. And so the more we practice doing this, bringing the awareness back to the heart, the more it becomes a natural thing that we do. And then in the next situation of perhaps tension or discomfort, we know the way back to the heart. It's less of this thing of how do I cope when reactivity arises and I'm being challenged, because we already know the way back to the heart. And as soon as our awareness is back in the heart, our reaction will be very different. We can come from a place of responding to the situation rather than reacting to the situation. So I wanted to continue the session by speaking about how not to lose heart. And I actually found a chapter in Pema's book on welcoming the unwelcome called How Not to Lose Heart. So I will read a little bit from here. She says, as we individuals grow in our resilience, as we become better at staying conscious and not losing heart, we will be able to remain strong in challenging conditions for the long haul. This is within the capacity of all of us. So she says, it's not like we one day wake up and we're resilient. It's something that we cultivate. It's something that we practice. It's something that we nurture. And she says, many of us who are engaged with the world experience discouragement regularly. If you're concerned about the environment, social justice and equity, prison reform, the welfare of immigrants, or the welfare of people and the planet in general, it's very easy to lose heart. But even though there are many situations that seem unfixable, I feel it's important not to lose heart. The question then becomes how? How do we not let ourselves spiral downward into a mindset of increasing hopelessness and negativity? Or if we're already finding ourselves going downhill, how do we pull ourselves up? And something that she says that we can use to go against this natural downward spiral, when we look at the world and we say, well, the environment, so many people migrating out of desperation of the situation in their own countries. It's difficult to look at the world and see the reality of things. But she says the thing that keeps her afloat is recognizing the goodness in people. So whatever situations we can see in the world, we can also see, look around you, look in your communities, look when you go to the supermarket, look into the eyes of the person you're speaking to and recognize the inherent goodness in people. See the goodness that is already all around you. The reason we often start to go downhill with losing heart is that we allow ourselves to get hooked by our emotions. So remember, I was saying often the emotion that may be present in the moment is not due to the current situation, but is actually repeating the story. So Luba's already heard this. Some of you have heard this as well. But emotions only last 30 to 90 seconds. So the peak of the emotion lasts 30 to 90 seconds. And then you might say, but I'm sure I got depressed all afternoon about thinking about this thing. It's because we retell ourselves the story. Isn't it so terrible? Isn't it so terrible? Isn't it so terrible? And we get stuck in a loop of negative thinking. I'm not saying we deny the reality of what is happening. I'm saying we have a freedom to choose when we are present, because when we're not present and we're lost in thought, then there's no choice. There's just a pattern and we're being driven by our pattern, by our mind, like a donkey following a carrot. But when there is presence, there is a choice to say, okay, I put the story down, pause. is it beneficial to anyone for me to be reliving, to be telling my friends? And I've had this conversation with my mom, who I love so dearly. But years ago, I decided to stop watching the news because I realized that it made me go into this downward spiral. And when I would call my mom, she would tell me about everything she'd seen on the news. And I was kind of like, oh, I have to say something, but how do I meet her with love instead of with resistance, and express that calling my mom, who I don't see throughout the year, who I only see sometimes during the year, to talk about the tragedies that are happening worldwide doesn't seem like an efficient use of our time. We're not changing the world. We're not doing anything. Both feeling really bad about the fact, this wasn't recently, by the way, because if you look 10 years ago, there were already things happening in the world in different places. And I was reading Nisargadatta Maharaj, I Am That. And in it, he says, at the time, there was, when the book was being written, there was something happening in what was then Pakistan, but is now Bangladesh. And I don't know what the conflict was, but there have always been things happening. It's not something new. We can focus on one thing right now, but noticing this tendency to get caught by the emotion. It's like we get hooked by the emotion, and then we keep going back and we stay in that frequency. When we have a moment of presence, we can say, wait, hang on a second, take a breath, awareness in the heart. Oh, there's also so much goodness happening in the world, because the news tells you about how many people have died, but no one's telling you how many people have been born today. You know about all the fires and the hectares of and kilometers of fires destroying forests, but you don't know about all the little saplings that are growing at this moment. So yes, there is a lot of difficulty, there's a lot of suffering, but there's also so much joy. And the news rarely show you someone laughing, you know, having a fit of laughter. They're more likely to show you someone crying. And it doesn't mean that the person who is shown crying isn't crying over something tragical, but there's also people laughing. And if we're only focusing on the negativity of the world, then we're getting, as Pema says, we're getting hooked. It's kind of like we get hooked by this emotion and we get dragged along it, and then we get lost, and then we might be in it for days. Some people get lost in it for years, and it's not necessary. It's not helpful. So I'll speak more about this in a moment, but I'll continue to read. I'm not reading the whole page. I'm just reading the sections that I highlighted. So she says, once we get worked up in a major way, we lose our effectiveness. We lose our skill to communicate in such a way that change is really possible. We lose our ability to do the one thing that is most often within our reach, to uplift ourselves and the people we encounter. When we get hooked, when we get really angry, resentful, fearful, or selfish, we start to go a little unconscious. The first step in pulling yourself up is to notice and acknowledge when you're going unconscious. Without doing that, nothing can get better for you. How could you change anything if you're not aware of what's going on? So she says, whether or not we let ourselves go unconscious has huge implications, not just for ourselves, but for all society. And finally, for this section, Trungpa Rinpoche said that if enough people have confidence in the basic goodness and our ability to pull ourselves up and be there for others, then when the challenges become great, instead of going down, society will grow stronger. So often, really, when we're losing heart, we're actually not being helpful at all. And it can be really hard, and it can feel like we have to strive to pull ourselves up. But in this striving to pull ourselves up, it means that we can offer a shoulder to cry on, or we can offer a little bit of positivity. And we're not talking about the toxic positivity where we're just saying, no, 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 just ignore what's bad, you know, pretend it's all good. That is not the same. But saying, you know, I'll use a light example, but let's say when it rains and someone is saying, oh, it's raining and I want it to go out. Well, at least the soil is receiving water and the plants will grow. So it doesn't mean that the other is not true, but we can see, some call this the silver lining. We can recognize the goodness in situations. We can recognize the goodness in people. We can recognize the goodness in life. And this makes us much more or much better equipped to deal with things when things get really difficult, because we have already recognized the goodness. So there's an acknowledgement of the hardship and the suffering, and also there's goodness. As we become better at staying conscious and not losing heart, we will be able to remain strong in challenging conditions for the long haul. And she shares from her personal experience that it is through years of meditation that she has been able to recognize when she goes downhill. So what happens when we go unconscious is that it's hard to get conscious, because then we're stuck in this spiral, right? And you might have noticed these, they're kind of like a dark hole, right? If you get into a negative spiral, watch the news, and then you get further into the negative spiral, and all of a sudden you're looking outside your window and everything looks gray. And you look at your life and you feel like everything has this tone of sadness and depression. And really, it's that we have gone unconscious and we have associated with what Eckhart Tolle refers to as the pain body. So the pain body feeds on pain, it survives on pain. And then once we're there, it's like everything is terrible. And it's really hard to see the goodness in anything. Something like having a gratitude journal or a morning gratitude practice can really help us out of that. So when you wake up, place your hand on your body or simply stay as you are, focus on your breath and recognize all the abundance that is present in your life. If you have 2 legs and 2 arms and 2 eyes, and all 6 of them work, we're already very fortunate. If you have a roof over your head, you're already very fortunate. So recognizing, and it doesn't mean, you recognizing that you have a roof over your head doesn't mean that people who don't have a roof over their head all of a sudden get one. But if you're thinking about the fact that they don't have a roof over their head, it's as if you didn't even have one. You're losing the ability to recognize the goodness because you're getting caught by the stories, by the suffering of others. So we expand our ability to hold space for others when we can recognize the goodness in our own life. And this leads me to a quote that I already shared with Luba, that is a beautiful quote from a Hopi Native American elder. I actually read this during COVID and I saved it, and someone shared it recently. And I was thinking, has there ever been a time in humanity when this quote hasn't been applicable? Unfortunately, but I'm glad that it exists. So I'll cut to the middle bit, but he says, learn about resistance with indigenous and African peoples. We have always been and continue to be exterminated, but we still haven't stopped singing, dancing, lighting a fire, and having fun. Don't feel guilty about being happy during this difficult time. It does not help at all being sad and without energy. It helps if good things emanate from and towards the universe here and now. Stay present and remember, it is through joy that one resists. Also, when the storm passes, each one of you will be very important with the reconstruction of this new world. You need to be well and strong, and for that to happen, there is no other way than to maintain a beautiful, happy, and bright vibration. This has nothing to do with alienation. This is a resistance strategy. And this has been really helpful for me in difficult times to think, I don't have to feel guilty for my joy, because your joy is contributing. I like to think of it, I'll use this metaphor. I like to think, and this is a metaphor that is used in spirituality. Think of a glass of water and think of suffering as being salt. Every spoonful of salt that is added makes the water more salty. If we could say that joy and happiness and love is clear water without salt, then you can help to bring balance. With every drop, you're contributing either to make the water more salty or actually to make it less salty. And so when you're celebrating life, you're saying, yes, I'm alive and I'm grateful for it. So whether it's dancing or singing. And so even if you have just heard terrible news of someone suffering, continue to celebrate life, or as this elder would say, celebrate even more as an act of resistance. And this can feel sometimes like it can be a little bit effortsome. In a way, there's like a resistance to like, oh, but should I be? And notice if that is really your soul asking, should I be celebrating life? Or if it's the mind. If it's the mind saying it's wrong to be happy when others are unhappy. Because like I was saying not so long ago, there will always be, probably every day of your existence in this incarnation, there will be something to be sad about. So will we spend our entire lifetimes crying because there are some people suffering? Or will we use that energy for inspiration for our own spiritual transformation? Because the only thing we can do is to contribute by our transformation. And in this sense, I want to speak of what we can do for others. So of course, if a petition comes my way, I will sign the petition. If there is a protest and I can participate in the protest, I will participate in the protest. If there is someone I can help directly, I will help them. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is just to be present and to be in the heart, to remain with an open heart. And what happens when we get caught in the story, and this is something I have seen on social media that I have found heartbreaking. So there was someone posting about how terrible one side of the conflict is, and then someone replying to them. And now there's a conflict on Facebook between these two women who are, spiritual guides themselves, arguing on a thread on Facebook, creating more violence, when in reality, that is not helping anyone. Taking sides and saying who is right and who is wrong. Yes, of course, there are people who are doing wrong things. I'm not denying that. But going against an entire nation, an entire religion, an entire population, because we are seeing some wrongdoing by some leaders, is completely missing the point. And now there's a conflict between many people on Facebook because they're trying to stand for what they think is right. So recognizing the goodness in the world can really help us to stay in the heart, to continue to open the heart, even when we perceive that there is pain, when we perceive that there is suffering, there is also goodness. And we can connect with the goodness in our heart. Next, I want to speak of something that has been a somewhat difficult theme to approach for myself. So I share it also with this awareness that it can be difficult to speak about this. And I invite you to stay in your heart as I mentioned this. And we spoke about this with Luba when we had our session, but this is the individual soul journey. So according to spiritual teachings, not only of yogic origin, but of different spiritual teachings, each soul is on their own unique journey. And on this journey, they encounter the challenges that will help them to evolve. And through these challenges, their soul will evolve in a positive way. And I like to use the example of Rabia. Rabia was a Muslim mystic. So she was an awakened being. But when she was born, the story goes, she was born in about 500 after Jesus, or 700, sorry, 700. The legend or the story says that when she was born, her family didn't even have enough money to light an oil lamp. So they didn't even have oil for a lamp. So her father took her out and he sold her to the slave trade. This was around, I think, Iran area. And so he sold Rabia when she was a newborn because her family couldn't afford to take care of her. And she was bought as a slave, and then she became a sex slave. And so, you can imagine how a sex slave would have been treated. She's being paid, she's not being paid, her owner is being paid, and she was, beaten and raped and continuously mistreated. And this is a soul who transmuted all her pain, all her suffering, and was able to awaken. So she became a self-realized being. There aren't so many stories of self-realized beings. We know of Buddha, we know of Jesus, we know of Nisargadatta, Ramana, and we have Rabia as well. And when we look at her life story, one might say, how incredible that someone who suffered so much, because we might say, okay, someone who starts with a good life, then at least has some tools. She started her life being abandoned by her family, or sold by her family into a slave trade. So meaning from a very young age, she experienced mistreatment. And yet she finds the ultimate liberation a human being can experience. So Rabia was able to experience the pure bliss of being, the detachment from the mind, the ultimate liberation, despite this terrible life that she had from our point of view. So when we say how terrible that this is happening to so-and-so, and I'm not speaking of any kind of act in particular, we must remember that we are looking at it from our limited perspective. And this is really hard to accept because we see the world through our eyes. So I said this to Luba as well, but for example, we think of death as being tragic, right? We think death is the worst thing that can happen in a way. And Ram Dass, who would speak of death, he said, death is like taking off a shoe that is too tight. Has anyone taken off a shoe that's too tight? It feels great. I love taking off. I don't wear tight shoes anymore, but when I used to go clubbing and wear heels, that moment where I took my shoes off was bliss. So we think of death as being this terrible punishment. But when we consider that perhaps we don't know what we don't know, because we don't remember, if we believe in reincarnation, then we don't believe our last death, and we don't remember, our past deaths, and we don't know what death is like. So what we perceive to be the worst thing could also be a liberation. So from this perspective, then in a way, we don't need to feel pity for anyone. And compassion and pity are not the same thing. And I'll read a quote by Pema that I read in the compassion meditation for those of you who were there. Pema says, sorry, just a second. She says, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. And Eckhart Tolle speaks of this as well, actually. I'm not going to read the passage, but he says, compassion is actually recognizing the other as equal as us. So seeing the other one as perfectly whole as they are. And this can really help us, for example, if you are dealing, let's say, with someone who is suffering, someone who is in front of you. If we think, poor them, it's so unfair, why is this happening to them? Then we are looking at them from above, in a sense, right? There's this sense of, I'm better off than them and poor them. This is not empowering whatsoever. Of course, when we can see the other as our equal, and if we can reflect on our own experiences, our most difficult life experiences, have they not brought goodness with them? If we think of the experiences that have been the most challenging, have they not brought us closer to what we may call God in the most difficult situations? And when we then consider this, then perhaps our perception of how wrong certain situations can also be a little bit diminished. Less of a judgment of good and bad, but actually just a presence back to the heart, remaining in the heart as much as possible. And we can hold space for someone who is suffering. And I referred to earlier on to this emotional resonance. Emotional resonance is, if right now I start crying, maybe some of you would start crying. That's emotional resonance. It can happen even through the screen. So we see suffering and we feel suffering. there's no issue with that. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing about human nature, is how easily we can connect to other people's emotions. It's then the cognitive appraisal that follows that is not ideal, that is not helpful. Because let's say, I use this example with you, Luba, and I'll use it again because it's a light one. But if a friend comes over and she's just broken up with her boyfriend and she's crying, I might cry too, because I've also had many heartache, my heart broken many times and been through many breakups, and I know how hard it can be, and I might cry too, and we can cry together. This is okay. Then the cognitive appraisal, which is poor her. Now what will she do? Now this is terrible. This is the worst thing that could happen. And this is the storyline. And in this story, there's actually very little truth. There may be no truth at all. Actually, maybe it's not poor her. Maybe she's been liberated and now she's able to experience something different, and perhaps she'll go and live in an ashram and self-realize and have a moment of enlightenment. Perhaps not. But it's my story about the situation that causes more suffering to me and to the other person. So can we trust the soul journey of each individual person? And without making it, oh, well, I'm glad that happened to them. Like I'll share, when I was 16, one of my best friends was 15 and she had skin cancer and she passed away. And at the time I thought, why? She was only 15. A 15-year-old dying of skin cancer just seems really unfair. Like, just I couldn't accept that was fair. And the more I study, death and life, because they exist together, the more I realized that seeing death as something that is bad is actually from the point of view of the person staying entirely, because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what happens on the other side. But if we see from the Hindu perspective, life as samsara, this birth and rebirth and birth and rebirth, where there's actually a lot of suffering, like I was saying, disease, old age, if you look around you, you will see that there is a lot of suffering, not just in your life, but in the people around you. And you consider that maybe they died young because they had completed their cycle of samsara, then is it a tragedy or is it a blessing? I'm not saying I have an answer to this, by the way, but it might be interesting to question everything that we think that we know, that because we're so sure, because we think, well, no, that is bad and that is good. This is the best and this is the worst. Can we accept that we don't know? That we don't really know? We might have a perception, we might have ideas, but we don't really know. So from this point of view, then there's a spaciousness as well, because then we can be in the heart and in presence and just go back to what we came in the beginning, acceptance, more acceptance around any situation. So something that can also be really helpful is the Sangha. So the Sangha, you might be familiar with this term, is the spiritual family. And I'm going to read a passage from a book that Rachel shared with me by Thich Nhat Hanh. And he says, when we see the suffering of the world, we know that by comparison, the suffering inside of us is hardly anything. That realization lessens our suffering right away. Getting in touch with the suffering of the world, we feel much less alone and our suffering feels smaller already. Coming together as a Sangha, or spiritual family, we have a collective aspiration. There is a collective willingness, energy, and desire. That's the kind of energy that helps us realize how very much we can do together. We can come together in a way that nourishes our joy as well as our sense of shared humanity. We feel joy in doing things together as a Sangha, smiling, singing, working together. During the time we're together, we develop our happiness, our purification, and our aspiration. As our aspiration becomes stronger and stronger, we can face many difficulties and take action together to help reduce the suffering in the world. So although we can accept that perhaps we don't know, we can also recognize that children not having enough food to eat is not something that is right with the world. We're not going to say, oh, well, I trust their soul journey. We can accept that we don't know what we don't know, but also we can still take action. And while it might feel like alone, we can't take much action, we can, but coming together as a group, coming together with this aspiration of spiritual evolution, then we are stronger. And this was part of the inspiration for this, because we had the session, just Luba and I initially. And like I said, it was like a marathon to cram everything in. And that's when I was like, actually, maybe we should do this together, come together. And hopefully we cultivate enough energy that after the call, we might feel, what can I do to lessen the suffering? Maybe I feel inspired to continue with my personal practice, because that's one of the steps as well that I wanted to share, is how much our daily spiritual practice contributes to a more peaceful world. So instead of being focused, like Pema says, being dragged, by this feeling of like, oh, there's just so much suffering in the world and everything is gray and it's so heavy. What can I do? Yes, there's so much suffering. What can I do? What can I do in my community? And perhaps you show up at work or at school or university or whatever you're going, and you show up with more lightness, with more love, with more compassion, with more patience, because you know how much suffering there is in others. Our shared humanity means we recognize, yes, I get caught in those spirals too. And if someone's a bit rude to you that day, instead of being like, oh, how rude, and then speaking about them behind their back to someone else, you'll actually think, I wonder what I could do to help them. And maybe you'll offer them, do you want a cup of tea? I'm making one. Maybe you'd like one. And that might seem like such a small act, but offering to make a cup of tea to someone who's going through a hard time might mean so much to them, feel like they're seen, like they're cared for, like someone cares. So finding a spiritual community where you are, or creating a spiritual community, can really change your community completely. So, if you're teaching yoga, I know some of you are already yoga teachers, you might offer a class, a donation-based class where we come together. But you don't have to be a yoga teacher. You could say, let's get together and read this spiritual text together and speak about it. And it might be a women's circle. It might be a phone call with your mother. It might be a phone call with your sister. It might be a gathering that you offer just as any, for any occasion, for a full moon, a new moon, for any reason, come together as a spiritual family. And when we come together as a spiritual family, what is really important? To come back to the heart, because relationships between humans are not so simple, actually. There's a lot of clashes, at least mentally, like I was sharing, with my boyfriend. He's someone I love. And here I am watching a spiritual documentary arguing about why I'm right. And that's really a reflection of how much work we have to do to go against our mental tendencies, because the mental tendency is to make ourselves right, to separate, to go against. So can we go back to the heart? And if we organize these spiritual gatherings, come back to the heart. So some practical tools, whether you are a yoga teacher or a human being living, you need this, but connecting with our intention. If you're going to go for tea with a friend, what is my intention? Because if we don't connect with our intention, or if you're having a romantic date with your partner, connect with your intention, come back to the heart. What is the intention for this gathering? If we're not connecting with our intention, often the mind will elope without your consent, and off you are, like me, arguing over why you're right. And then you go home and you feel guilty and you're like, why did I do that? So by grounding ourselves in our intention, what is my intention for this gathering, for this tea with a friend, for a phone call? Before you pick up the phone and call a friend, what is the intention? I want to be a listening ear, or I want to offer support. And perhaps the intention is also checking in with yourself, am I able to do this at this time? Because if we're feeling, we spoke of burnout, right? If you're feeling burnt out and you're doing it because you're feeling pressure, then maybe the best thing is not to make the phone call at that time. If someone says, I need your help, it's okay to say, at this moment, I'm not able, but I send you my prayers, I send you my love. So connecting with our intention is really powerful. What can I offer? And then once we have closed the session, so it can be, a session like this, it can be, like I said, a phone call, a meeting, you might want to do something like shaking, what we call an aura cleanse, which is just going over and, okay, if you've watched the news, maybe also taking a moment to release, not taking, when I shared with you at the beginning, when I started doing this kind of work, I'll share with you actually, after the first retreat I ever did, I had diarrhea. During the retreat, I was fine. I had diarrhea. I had these like pus things show up behind my legs. I've never had it again, and I never had it before. I don't know what it was, but I think I took everything as if it was my own, into my own personal heart. And it was so much because, of course, when we go to a retreat, we're doing this work of, putting things down, but I felt like I should take it. The truth is, all you need to be is be a channel. You can listen with full presence, listen fully with your whole being, with your whole heart, and let it go through you. You don't need to carry it. You don't need to hold it. That's not necessary. And then that's sustainable. Then we can do this work. Then we have energy to do another retreat, rather than thinking, gosh, I can only do one retreat a year if that's what it's going to, if that's how it's going to leave me. But if we're able to be present, let it slide, let it flow, let it go through you. And something that's very dear to my heart that I feel like I speak to everyone about is having a daily spiritual practice. So every morning when you begin your day, start your day with connecting to that. Because when we feel overwhelmed, it's because we feel like it's just us against the world, or just us trying to save the world, just a little me, power lifting this entire world structure. I mean, good luck. But if you're connecting to something greater than you, something more profound, and I don't like to use the names for it because it's all, it doesn't fit. Even in Arabic, one of the words for God is love. I do like that word, love, for God. But, even that, because we're often thinking of personal love, but if you're connecting to the spiritual heart, to this part of you that is much vaster than the mind has so many limitations, so many stories. I can't, it's not fair, it's good, it's bad. If we can connect to that every morning, then we're much better able to deal with life. If we can regulate our nervous system, because when we connect to that, we can do it in different ways, but I recommend meditation as the most powerful tool. If we can connect through meditation to that silence, to that stillness within us, then we can feel like we have limitless power. We are limitless. We have infinite power to bring about change in the world, starting with ourselves, of course. So if possible, start every day with meditation. And I know some of you already have a daily practice, but if you don't have a daily practice, don't start with half an hour. It's probably you'll do one day and then the next day it'll be like, I can't do it. So start with 5 minutes, start small, light an incense, light a candle, create a sacred space in your home where you feel that you can go to, and then no matter what the problems are in the world, you have a place, a safe space that you can go back to. And I really, really recommend, some of you have heard me say this many times, so I'm sorry that you're hearing it again. I hope you're doing it, but don't turn your Wi-Fi on until you've done your personal practice. If you turn your Wi-Fi on and the first thing you see is how many people died in an explosion on the other side of the world, it's really difficult to regulate yourself after that, because we're human, because we feel. Of course it's terrible. Of course it's not fair. Of course we should be outraged. And also if you take the time to connect with the peace within, you can then take that news and feel the sorrow, and there's still a background of peace. There's something deeper within you. And so I cannot express how important it is to start your day not looking at your phone, but looking at your inner world, looking at that space within you that can hold the immensity of the world, because actually it is beyond that. So there's a beautiful quote that Ramana Maharshi said, which is, your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render the world. So you want to help the world, you want to save the world, focus on self-realization, on this awakening to what we really are. Because until we are fully awakened, unfortunately, we are still causing harm. And it's not something to feel guilty about. Of course, I'm not saying, go around looking how terrible you are, but do take the time to look at yourself, at your, what we call the samskaras, which are these patterns, the things that we do, this compulsive behavior, the drinking then that leads to depression, that then leads to being unpleasant to the people we love, or the whatever our behaviors are. When we meditate, when we practice meditation, we cultivate this self-awareness so that then in the moment, something happens. Instead of going straight into reactivity, go back, okay, pause in the heart. What am I feeling? And often just that work of what am I feeling will help dissipate. And so instead of being this, like, we have this ammunition and anything goes and there's an explosion. And if you speak, if you might be one of these people who explodes, if you speak to people who have these like bouts of rage, they will often tell you how guilty they feel. No one wants to do harm. No one wants to harm. Everyone thinks they are doing the best. We always think we're doing the best, but from our place of ignorance, the best is often not so much the best. So cultivate self-knowing, not the little self, well, also the little self, but the deeper self, this infinite part of you. Through practice, light a candle, light an incense, leave your phone aside, take some breaths. And, if you want, I'm not going to do a whole thing on meditation, but I have a couple of videos I did on meditation that I'm happy to share with you. To connect to the spiritual heart, blowing on the embers of the heart is a Sufi practice. I have a recording. I listened to it yesterday, and halfway through there's someone starting a motorbike, and there's also a lot of roosters. So I'll share it with you if you want it, but I'm going to try and record a new one because it's a little bit disruptive. But blowing on the embers of the heart, every time you notice, bring your awareness back to your heart, just as we did during the break. If you can, come back to the heart and notice how much more joyful your life is. Even in the midst of a crisis, come back to the heart. And in this awareness of the heart, there's also so much joy and bliss. And we all want to live more blissful. So Eckhart says, whenever there's resistance, whenever there's like contraction, there's ego. And what happens when we see the ego? It vanishes, it hides. And then it'll take on a new outfit and it'll be like, hey, it's me, I'm not the ego. And then you'll be like, oh, the ego's gone. And then you can be like, wait, if there's still a voice, if there's still a dialogue, if there's still a commentary, again, it's the ego. The ego is not to be made into an enemy. It's a natural mental formation that happens through the separation from spirit to matter. We become this, and we take ourselves to be this and only this. And when we take ourselves to be this and only this is when the issues arise. Because when we're suffering, we inflict suffering on others. So the kindest thing we can do is to strive for self-realization. And in this striving, of course, there's no, it's not an angry striving, a battling. There's no fighting in this. There's this gentleness. I think it was Erin who said gentleness. When we live with an open heart, there's this. So let's cultivate that, coming back into the heart, coming into this space of ease, of gentleness, and know that it's a practice. So be gentle with yourself as you practice. And every time you notice you're more in the mind than in the heart, then simply awareness back in the heart, back in the heart. So I have spoken a lot. I have said so many things, and things I didn't think I'd say and things I have left out, but I feel like enough has been said on my side. So I would love to invite you to share one thing or more things that you would like to implement into your life, perhaps from this session. I find that when we share, and don't worry if right now you're like, oh my God, I have no idea. I don't know what I'm going to say. Don't worry. You can, when you feel inspired to, unmute yourself and say anything that comes out. There's no right or wrong. But basically, when we express out loud, we solidify in a sense. So what will I take away from this? And if someone says what you already said, that's also okay. So this invitation for you to share. If you don't want anyone to see your face, you can share in writing, as I will be sharing this video with the people who missed the session today. So that's all from me, but if you feel inspired to, would love to hear about what you are taking away from this and what you want to implement in your life.
Thank you, Melissa. I really like the lesser: locate, embrace, stop, remain. I mean, I think, I've known that for a while, that we've got to sit with the feelings, right? And, and allow it to be, and not try and label it, and then, for it to pass, right? Because everything's going to pass eventually. So I really enjoyed that as just a way to kind of, abbreviation for it. So I like that. And also it's funny because of some things that have made me laugh about my conversations and my things that have been going on in my head for the last couple of days. And feeling like that I don't know, like I deserve, like I'm not being valued enough for the work that I'm doing, and that somehow I need to monetize on it. And I'm kind of selling myself short, but I want everybody to come and it to be free for people. And, so I'm like, oh, it should be like this kind of payment and sliding scales, and, and then, just boiling it all down, that I have got a beautiful roof over my head and I have got enough to eat. And so, whatever, whatever this story is, I need to just let it go and continue with what I'm doing and not hold so much importance with it. So, and this idea that that there is space for everybody with whatever that they're, not seeing other people as competition or whatever, that kind of idea. So yeah, that's my takeaways.
That's
Thank you.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Kelly. Yeah. I feel like it can be so hard in a way in a group with people we don't know to be like, I'm like this sometimes. And when we say it, everyone else is like, you too? Oh, thank God. I thought it was just me. So I'm really grateful for you sharing that. And yes, you
Thank
are.
you. Yeah. Oh, the cat just knocked something over in the kitchen. So I what? Sorry. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Kelly.
I can go next if no one else wants to. Thank you so much, Melissa. Even though this is the second session I come, which is dedicated to a similar topic, I've learned so much, and I really opens my heart. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. In terms of action points, so I've already implemented off the back of the retreat that I did with you and Rachel. I find it easier to let my sorrow out, which is really great. And also after our last conversation, I started shaking, and as like an animal after I hear really, really distressing news, which I feel is really helping. And today, what I'm taking in no particular order is having morning gratitude practice as part of the morning practice, switching the Wi-Fi on, off, even until after the practice, and having the daily spiritual practice, which I'm in the process of putting together. I also thought of reading myself the quote that you shared about the importance of having joy as a way of conditioning myself to really believe that I'm allowed to have joy, even though I am exposed to so much unfairness and suffering, because I find that a bit difficult. So these are the immediate things I think I'm going to take away. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Luba. And yes, you are allowed to feel joy and happiness. And Nicole says, open hands, open heart, open mind. I hold far too much, creating chronic pain. Yes, it's amazing how our bodies tell us when we're not releasing. And I'll share just to echo that, at the first 10-day silent retreat I went to, I had a terrible pain in my back. It was like a dagger in my back. And I thought, well, I don't know if I can do these silent retreats because the posture is just the pain. And I hadn't realized how much tension there was in my mind and how that translated into my jaw and into my back. And I'm so happy to share that now, after that, I sat 17 days and the pain didn't come back. So I was able to. So with time, with practice, the more, we see this happening, we can be like, okay, just gonna relax into the now. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Nicole. And Annie says,
I can.
no, you go.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing all of that. Yeah, I think I'm really taking away everything. But the reminder that you gave us that I thought was so powerful for me is about knowing that the difference between compassion and pity, and being able to recognize the other person as your equal, and understanding that they are on their own soul journey, and they are exactly the same as you said. And I think this can help me a lot, to not really hold so much, because I tend to do that a lot. And it comes out as well in my body with like aches and sometimes even like physical manifestations of like tension and all of that. So I thought that was really beautiful, because it's so true. We don't really, like, we can only see things through our own lenses and our own perspective. So why would I create more suffering by judging how another person is feeling or experiencing? So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for being here. And I find that all these reminders are helpful for me. So, I'm so grateful that I could explore this and be like, oh, yes, that is so true. Especially when we really love someone and we see them suffering, there can be this desire to stop the suffering. Like, I just want to make it better. But actually, that's for them to go through that. And then I think of my own suffering and how it has helped me in the long term. So it definitely helps me as well. And I'm so grateful for all these books and all these wise people giving us this information. Thank you, Christy. And I'm going to read what Annie wrote. I want to observe more. I mean, when it comes to feeling, to observe the mind and the ego and come back to the heart and focus on my truth. I think my mind and my ego causes my insecurity a lot, and I want to open my heart and be free. Yes, wishing you an open and free heart, Annie. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Melissa. So that was a really nice reminder. The other day there was this homeless person on like the center of where the lights are, right? And I'm pulling up, and you don't really want to like look over at them, right? But he waves, right? And I don't have anything to give him, but I smiled, but then I wasn't sure if he could see it, but I started thinking about that, like they're people too. And so that then you brought that up, and it was just yeah, it's a nice little reminder that they're people too. um and then the other thing is just that reminder of coming back, because I think my reaction is anger. I think like my main thing is to go to anger. So yeah, I'm just gonna focus on coming back to the heart more, and because I've been reacting more lately, I think, and also sitting for periods of time with my back lately, like I have to move my neck and stretch, and but yeah, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Erin. And please, to everyone, whatever you may have discovered during this session is not something to make ourselves feel guilty about, but rather to celebrate that we have some awareness around. So whether it's anger or something else, simply coming back to the heart. In the heart, there's space for all of us, every aspect of us. And easily, gently, those things become less who we are. The grasping, the clinging, it's all the mind. It's always the mind. But in the heart, there's none of that. So thank you, Erin. Well, I'd like to finish with a mantra that we won't sing together because well, we will sing it together, but not at the same time without the microphone, because Zoom doesn't really like that. But it's Om Mani Padme Hum. I'm going to write it actually. And this is the mantra of compassion, which actually means the jewel is in the lotus. And you may have seen lotus flowers grow, and they actually start their life in the mud. So if you look at the beginning of the life of these beautiful lotus flowers, this is a symbol for spirituality, for the spiritual journey. Actually, it begins its life in the mud, and it grows through this mud, and it comes out to the surface of the water. And the lotus is an expression for self-realization. So the unalome, which is this little shape here, which is going in circles before it reaches towards the lotus, that messy thing is actually our spiritual journey. So it's not linear, right? It begins, it's like you go in circles and you're like, what? I still get angry, or I still close my heart, I still do this. And when we realize that, wow, we're realizing that means we're becoming aware, we're becoming present. So we'll chant Om Mani Padme Hum a few times. I will be singing it all alone here, but I know we're singing it together. And when we sing Om Mani Padme Hum, we're actually singing not just for ourselves, but for the liberation of all beings. So really, when we think of the freedom of all beings, is wishing for them to be released of the grasp of the mind, and we wish it to ourselves as well. We'll take a deep breath and bring your awareness into your heart as you breathe out and relax. Om. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. One more round. Sending love to all sentient beings, wishing them liberation, peace, joy, freedom. Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. We bring our hands together in a prayer at heart center. And together we wish for the happiness, the freedom from suffering for all beings, knowing that it starts within ourselves, that we can contribute to a more peaceful, more loving, more compassionate world. And it starts with us. May all beings be happy, may all beings be free, and may all our thoughts, all our words, and all our actions contribute to the happiness and freedom of all beings. Sat Nam. Thank you so much for joining me for this workshop. I enjoyed preparing for it so much. I didn't enjoy so much worrying about whether anyone would come. But here I am, perfectly human and learning to live with an open heart. So I'm very grateful that you chose to be here. And as a reflection of this heart that I continue to open, I will upload the recording and I will share it with you. And if you would like to share it with anyone, you know, as a gift, that is wonderful. So I'll share it with you and you can pass it on to anyone who you think could benefit from it. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Thank you.